In this practice, it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. In yoga, we call it a hybrid practice. We'll be seated for a lot of poses and also supine. I'm going to use some blocks, which I'm sitting on, and a strap, and possibly a blanket. And those of you that, and when you're lying down, you like to have a little elevation for your head, you can get a pillow or a blanket or something so that you're comfortable. We'll start seated. In a seated position, you might want to be elevated. I'm sitting on blocks, or if you're quite flexible, you won't need blocks. Place your feet in front of you and place your feet together. Now, place your feet together in such a way that if you were to take your forehead down, your forehead would reach essentially the arches of the feet. To do a little bit more ankle work, take two fists together and take your fist between the base of your toes, but see if you can press your heels together. So this is a bit of an ankle stretch that we're working on. You still have a little resistance that you can work the base of the big toe against the fist. Now just draw yourself down slightly. And as you do, if you feel like you're kind of losing engagement in one leg, lift the knee up slightly so that you can keep a strong engagement. You can keep the heels pressing. Continue to draw down slightly. I notice that my feet are slightly back from where my forehead would touch, so I'm going to slide them forward a little bit. As you keep the heels pressing, just draw down. And try to keep the head lifted. Just to have this nice opening, hip opening, before we go into deeper poses. Now inhale, lift yourself up and come to all fours position. In all fours position, place your blocks if you've got them. If you don't have them, no problem. Step your right foot forward, and as you do, just walk your right foot over to the right edge of the mat. You can take your blocks just at the diagonal and bow forward. Take a look at your right knee. Make sure that the right knee stays right over the ankle, and draw your right thigh back slightly. The pelvis reaches back as you draw down at the diagonal. Now inhale, rise up. You can keep your hands on the blocks if you wish. Reach your right arm up and drop into the pose, and turn your heart toward the inner right knee as you get this nice side body stretch. Release your hands down to the blocks or the floor and step your right foot back. Take your left foot forward. Walk your blocks to the inside of your stance. You might want to walk your left foot to the far edge of your mat. At the diagonal, draw your heart down. See if you can move the pelvis just slightly to the left. And you might feel a little bit of inner thigh action, inner thigh stretch, and if it feels like too much, then that would be your signal to back off a little bit. Now lift yourself up. With the right hand just to the inside of the ankle. Take your left hand up, reach over, and see if you can drop yourself into a lower lunge with a slight twisting action. Allow your breath to expand the side body so fully. Release your hands down. Come to all fours position And in all fours position, lift up to downward facing dog. In downward facing dog, walk your hands back to your feet with your knees bent. Place your hands right above your knees. Look forward. With your arms straight, draw your heart forward, and now take your gaze inward toward your heart and draw from the navel back toward your backbone. Now inhale, heart moves forward. Exhale. Inhale, just moving the spine, lifting your sit bones on the inhale. On the exhale, it's almost like you're drawing your tailbone down toward the floor and reaching it forward. And again. Now come to what feels like the middle of that movement. So it's not too much of an arch. And lift your arms up off your knees. Drop your pelvis down. Drop your hands down to the mat. Walk your hands forward. From here, come to a plank position and lower yourself to the mat. Come to your fingertip tops on the mat. Hug your elbows in and inhale, rise up. Exhale, soften. 2 more. Inhale, lift up. Exhale, soften. Now see if you can do most of the lifting quality with the muscles that support your spine. Inhale, rise up. Maybe you can even take your fingers off the mat. If you have your fingers on the mat, see if on the next in-breath you can let the back do all the work. The back muscles do all the work. Release down. Come to all fours position. In all fours position, tuck your toes under, lift up. Come to tiptoes. Draw your heels over toward the right side, so now your feet are parallel to the back edge of the mat. Come back to the center position. Lift your heels up high, almost like tiptoes. Draw your heels to the left side. Breathe in to expand through the side body. Come back to center. Now come to a plank position and do the same. Take your heels over to the right, stack your feet, lift your left arm up to come to the side plank pose. Release your hand down. Same thing. Draw your heels to the left. Stack your right foot on top of your left. Lift your right arm up. Release your right hand down. Come back to a plank position. Lower yourself to the mat. Once you're on the mat, interlace your fingers. Have your elbows drawing slightly narrower than your shoulders. Tuck your toes under. Lift your knees up. See if you can lift your hips off the mat and maybe lift your hips high. Walk your feet in toward your interlaced fingers. Look slightly forward. Lift your right leg up. Bend your right knee. Just get the knee to lift as high as possible. Release your right foot down. Take your left leg up. Bend your left knee. Again, lift your left knee high. Release your foot down. Come back to a forearm plank position. Or if that doesn't work for you, keep your pelvis lifted. Now take your knees down, the tops of the thighs down, and place your hands alongside your ribs. Again, inhale, lift yourself up, but have that lifting quality from your back strength. Release down. Inhale, lift up. Exhale down. Again, inhale, rise up. Exhale, draw down. Now come to all fours position. Tuck your toes under. Have your inner knees touching. And draw your weight back toward your heels. Now, for some of us, we should leave our hands on the yoga mat. For others, you might be able to take a little bit more weight on your feet. Maybe even you can take your hands off the yoga mat. It's up to you. For some of us, this can be really challenging. When you take your weight to the heels, a lot of times the heels draw away from each other. So see if you can have the inner toes, inner big toes, and the inner heels working toward one another. It's just a nice dorsiflexion of the ankle, strengthens the ankle quite a bit. Interlace your fingers, reach your interlaced fingers up. Draw your interlaced fingers over to the right side and back to center. Draw your interlaced fingers over to the left side and back to center. Interlace your fingers the opposite way. Look at your thumbs this time. Lift your thumbs a little higher than your baby fingers and keep your elbows slightly bent. Draw over to the right side again. Come back through center. Draw over to the left side. Your feet might be feeling a little challenged right now, so come out of the pose, but see if you can come out of the pose really slowly as you take your hands back to the mat. Come to all fours position and take your knees as wide apart as the mat is. Draw your pelvis back toward your feet. With your fingers in that finger tip-top position, just draw the pelvis way back. Draw the pelvis back toward your heels, but keep your armpits and your elbows lifted. Let your heart just draw toward the yoga mat. And enjoy your breath here. Walk your hands over to the left side. Stack your right hand on top of the left hand and reach your right hand just a little bit further as you draw your right sit bone back toward your right heel. Come to finger tip-top position again. Walk your hands over to the right side. And in the same way, stack your left hand on top of your right. Draw your left sit bone closer to the left heel. And on the next in-breath, come back to the center position. And lift yourself up to come to a seated position. The seated position that we started with, Baddha konasana. So have your feet together. And again, for those of us that aren't that flexible, a little elevation is very helpful. So if you sit on blocks or a blanket or whatever, or a bolster, whatever it works for you, place your hands in that same position. Your fists together just as a way to separate the base of the big toes from one another, but press the middle of your heels together. So your hands are just there to keep that dorsiflexion action of the ankle that we've been working on. Now see if you can just grow your spine, lengthen first. Now lift your knees just slightly. You might want to adjust your feet so that roughly they're far enough forward so that as you come forward and down somewhat, you could just imagine that your forehead might land approximately where the arches of the feet are as you draw yourself a little bit deeper into the forward fold. Your breath is nice and full. You just allow the in-breath to flow, and you'll find that you'll lift slightly on the in-breath. The out-breath takes you just slightly deeper. Now if you're feeling quite a bit of kind of tugging around your pelvic area, your hips, then you've probably gone too far. So back off a little bit. Keep your legs active though. Draw down into this forward fold. Now inhale and lift yourself up. Those of us that are elevated slightly, we might want to stay elevated for this next one. Take your right foot just to the outside of the left hip. Take your left foot to the outside of the right hip. And see if you can stack your knees nicely. And as you stack your knees, work your feet. So you're pressing the outside edges of the feet. See if you can draw the toes a little bit closer to your shin bones. So again, we're keeping that dorsiflexion of the ankles that we've been working on throughout the practice. Now with your fingertips forward, just see perhaps if you can just draw yourself into a forward fold. Again, the legs are not passive in this pose. You're working the baby toe side of the foot as you draw down and just get this nice hip opening. On the next inhale, slowly lift yourself up to come out of the pose and trade sides. So as you take the feet to the opposite sides, press down through the outer edge of the baby toe side of the foot. Keep the legs active. Walk your hands forward. Again, I like that fingertip top position because it gives you so much room to move here. Lift your elbows slightly. Reach your elbows forward. Keep both sit bones planted and draw forward and slightly down. On the next in-breath, lift yourself to come out of the pose and lie on your back, and we'll cross our legs in a very similar way when you're lying on your back. In the same way that we were just doing, cross your right thigh over your left and bring your thighs in closer to you. Just kind of give them a nice hug in. Notice when you do, the low back is really pressing on the mat. So see if you can just back off slightly so it feels like there's a little bit of space between the low back and the mat. Now let your hands draw somewhere on the legs so that you can take your feet wide apart. Just activate your toes now by drawing your toes toward your shin bones. Now use your hands to help guide your feet slightly forward toward the top of your mat. You'll feel a sensation, but if it feels too intense, you just need to back off. Keep on reaching your toes forward. And release out of the pose. unravel your legs, park your feet down, and just pause here for a moment. And as you pause, press your elbows down, lift your heart nicely so that you get this nice engagement of the spine. Because when you wrap your left thigh over your right and you lift your feet up, notice how immediately, if you take your thighs too close, go ahead and do that. Just take your thighs really close and notice how the waistline now is pressing pretty firmly against the mat. So draw your knees slightly away so that you can coax the lumbar curve into its natural form. Let your hands slide down the legs so that you can just assist in taking your feet a little bit further away from each other. So it's a very similar action that we are doing on the floor, but because the spine is so elongated here, it's really focusing in on the hip area. Those of you that can take your hands just a little bit closer to your feet, or even hands to the heels if that's available to you. But just be very mindful, like what feels right for you. You can now release your feet down to the mat. Take your feet together, and with your feet together, press as firmly as you can. So you're really working the feet against one another. And it looks really passive, but see if you can become really engaged here. Draw your elbows down with the palms facing each other. Get a nice lift to the chest. Now, see if you can draw the low back just a little bit closer to the mat. You might have to lift your knees up slightly to do that, but see if you can keep that engagement while still pressing the feet in toward each other. Now release, just relax your feet. If you've got a strap, grab your strap. With your knees bent and your feet planted, your feet about hip distance apart, see if you can remain mindful of a curve in the lumbar spine. So notice if you take your right knee too close to your ribs, then everything goes really flat in the low back. So lift your right knee up. Just cross your ankle right at the left knee, and maybe you can keep the curve. So as you take your strap and place your strap around your right foot, can you keep the curve as you lift your right foot up? Now, as you do, draw your toes toward your knee and take your foot just slightly out of 90 degrees so that you can get more curve. Take your foot just slightly lower and hug the inner knee to the left inner knee. So as your hands work to draw your toes a little closer to your shin bone, just keep that. Keep hugging the midline with the inner knees touching. Now park your ankle to that outer left knee so that you can keep the curve that you created in the low back as you place your right foot down to the mat. Take your left ankle to the outer right knee, again being very mindful that just keep the curve in the lumbar spine. Place the strap around your left foot, lift your left foot up. Now draw down just slightly so that you're not at 90 and so that you can get a nice engagement of the left leg. You can draw your toes a little bit closer to your shin bone. Now drop the foot down again so that the inner knees touch, so that you've got that tactile impression to really hug the inner knees toward the midline of your supine stance here. Keep working the hands to draw your toes just a little bit more intensely toward your shin. Now release your left foot, release your strap. In the same way that we did with the strap, we'll next do a similar action with the leg, but we'll take the feet together again. Press them really firmly. Notice a nice curve in your lumbar spine. Keep your left leg very active, but free your right leg and lift it up. Spread your toes. Draw your toes toward your shin. Now slowly lower the leg down. Oh, so slowly. Keep your left leg active. You're still pressing the baby toe side. Lower your right foot so that it's just about 2 or 3 inches above the mat, and keep this action. Draw your toes toward your shin bone on the right leg. Keep the left leg active. Keep a nice lumbar curve. You just maintain a nice action here. The leg is barely lifted. Now release your foot and release the whole leg to the mat. Slide your foot to meet the left foot, so you're in Supta Baddha konasana again. Press your feet very firmly toward one another. A little reminder about the low back. You don't want to be pressing it against the mat, so you might have to lift your knees up slightly to get that engagement. Keep the right leg very active. Free your left foot and take it up toward the ceiling. Spread your toes, draw your toes toward your shin bone. Slowly lower your heel down toward the mat. And as you slowly move toward the mat, you keep the engagement of the right foot. You keep the lumbar curve. You move the heel just a little bit above the mat. With this full engagement, with the toes still reaching for the shin bone. So the legs are really working here. Relax your left ankle and take your left foot to the floor. Take both feet back to Baddha konasana in the supine pose. Press your feet very firmly. Lift your knees just slightly again if you feel like you've got too much. If you have too much of a lumbar curve, then just back off slightly. Now relax your legs. Just slide your right leg out, your left leg out. Allow your arms to relax to the side. With your palms facing up, just close your eyes. Allow your legs to relax with the heaviness of your pelvis. The legs can feel just completely supported by the earth. Take your attention to your breath. Have a nice evenness to the breath. A nice length to the exhale breath. The breath draws in deep and out long. With this full support that you receive, allow your facial muscles, your shoulders, your arms to completely release. Take your focus to a very free and natural breath. Enjoy this time in Shavasana. Namaste.